Everyone believes life changes slowly, one decision at a time, one relationship at a time, one ordinary day after another. But sometimes life doesn't wait that long. Sometimes it only takes one night, one stranger, one unexpected conversation, one moment that quietly changes everything you thought you understood about love and about yourself. For Emily Carter, that night began like any other in New York City, but by the time the sun rolls over the skyline, she was no longer the same woman. Emily Carter was 34 years old, smart, successful, and admired by almost everyone who knew her. She worked as a senior creative director at a large advertising agency in Manhattan. Her life was organized, efficient, and predictable. Every morning began the same way: coffee, emails, meetings, deadlines. Her apartment overlooked the glowing skyline of New York City, and from the outside, her life looked perfect. But perfection often hides a quiet truth. Success can build a beautiful life and still leave a strange emptiness inside it. Emily had spent years building a life based on control, especially when it came to love, because love had once taught her something important. Feelings can be unpredictable, and unpredictable things can break carefully planned lives. So Emily stopped chasing excitement. She chose stability, logic instead of emotion, routine instead of chaos, until one cold night in October when something unexpected happened. It was almost midnight when Emily finally left her office. The streets of Manhattan were quieter than usual. A cold wind moved between the tall buildings while the bright city lights reflected across the wet pavement. Emily felt exhausted after another long day of work. Before heading home, she decided to stop at a small cafe that stayed open all night. The cafe was not far from Central Park. Inside, the atmosphere felt warm and calm. Soft jazz music played quietly in the background. Only a few people sat inside. Emily ordered a cup of coffee and sat near the window. That's when she noticed him, a man sitting alone at a corner table. He wasn't scrolling through his phone like everyone else. Instead, he was reading a book, completely focused, completely calm. There was something unusual about him, not because he was trying to get attention, but because he clearly didn't care about it. Calm people stand out in cities like New York City. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Emily quickly looked away, but a few seconds later, the man spoke. "Long night?" His voice was warm and confident. Emily smiled slightly. "You could say that." He closed his book and leaned back. "What do you do?" "Advertising," Emily replied. He nodded. "That explains the tired expression." Emily laughed softly. "And what about you?" The man thought for a moment before answering. "I spend a lot of time observing people." The answer was strange, but interesting. His name was Adrian Blake. He was 38, and somehow impossible to read. Adrian asked thoughtful questions, but rarely spoke about himself. Yet every time he did speak, his words carried a surprising amount of depth. They talked about work, about ambition, about the strange loneliness that often exists in big cities. At one point, Adrian looked at Emily thoughtfully and said something unexpected. "You seem like someone who planned her life very carefully." Emily raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" Adrian smiled slightly. "People who control everything usually do it because they're afraid of losing control." Emily was surprised, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt comfortable talking to him, more comfortable than she had felt with anyone in a very long time. Hours passed quickly. Eventually, they stepped outside and began walking through the quiet streets of New York City. The city lights reflected across the pavement as they continued talking. They talked about childhood memories, about dreams people are often afraid to admit, about the pressure of building a life that looks successful from the outside. At one point, Adrian said something Emily would never forget. Sometimes strangers understand us better than people who have known us for years. They slowly walked toward the quiet paths near Central Park. The city suddenly felt calmer. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence felt peaceful, not awkward, just comfortable. Emily realized something strange. She had only known Adrian for a few hours, yet the conversation felt deeper than most relationships she had experienced. That's when Adrian suddenly said something unexpected. "You know, tonight will probably be the only time we ever meet." Emily looked at him, surprised. "Why would you say that?" Adrian smiled slightly. "Because moments like this are rare, and rare moments usually don't repeat." Emily didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted the night to continue forever, but another part of her understood exactly what he meant. Some connections exist only in a single moment in time. Trying to force them to last can destroy their beauty. The sky slowly began to lighten. Morning was approaching. The streets of New York City began filling with early commuters and taxis starting a new day. Adrian looked at the rising sun and then back at Emily. "You know something," he said quietly. "What?" "Your life is probably going to change soon." Emily laughed softly. "That sounds mysterious." Adrian shook his head. "It's not a prediction. It's just something I can see in the way you think." "And what exactly do you see?" Emily asked. Adrian paused before answering. "I see someone who built a perfect life but hasn't allowed herself to truly live it." The words stayed in the air between them, and somehow Emily knew he was right. A few minutes later, Adrian stood up and, "I should go." Emily suddenly felt a strange sadness. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Adrian looked at her quietly. Then he smiled. "Maybe, but sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we only meet once." And with that, he walked away into the early morning crowd of New York City. Emily never saw Adrian Blake again, but that night changed something inside her forever, because she realized something important. Life isn't just about plans, or control, or predictable outcomes. Sometimes the most powerful moments arrive unexpectedly. Sometimes a stranger understands you better than people who have known you for years. And sometimes it only takes one night to remind you that you're still alive. Because not every person who enters your life is meant to stay. Some people appear only to wake you up, to show you a version of yourself you forgot existed, and then they disappear, leaving behind a lesson you carry for the rest of your life. And for Emily Carter, one quiet night in New York City was enough to change everything.